So shall I pick up the line where I left?
I think
Yeah.
so. We had 20 participants.
Okay. Then I will share my screen again. Okay, so everybody sees what they are supposed to see, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, so back to the exponential time algorithm, which is an exact algorithm. It exists, but this k to the n constant can be really large because this k comes from a very recent estimate on the highest number of stable matchings in bipartite instances. And the currently existing best upper band is 2 to the 17th. So if you divide this by 3, then you get the current existing upper band for this case, that there is quite some room to improve upon that band at the moment. So this much about exact algorithms. What else is missing from the computational side? Well, approximation, of course. How to approximate the number of votes. So by psi and m, we denote the number of agents who prefer n to m. And the unpopularity factor of a specific matching m is you fix this matching m and you compare it to all other n matching, and you divide the number of agents who like n more by the number of agents who prefer m are matching. And of course, the lower this is, the more popular intuitively my matching is. Another way of comparing how many people like other matchings more than my matching, my m, is to distract them from each other. These are very non-precise definitions because we don't want to divide by 0, for example. If you want precise definitions, you go to the literature I point you to on the slide. Popular matchings have a factor of 1 and a margin of 0. So if there is no n matching that collects more votes for himself than m, my own matching for himself, then the division gives you 1 and the distraction will give you 0. So those are the best solutions you can reach. And obviously you want to minimize these numbers. Even though there is no popular matching, we can still try to search for a matching with a low unpopularity margin or factor. Again, if you're from voting, then you can consider this as the minimax rule or the Simpson-Cramer voting rule. Thank you for Ulla Andres and Marcus Bill for the pointers. This is just the same. So there are a bunch of results for unpopularity margin and factors. They are different. So in instances where there is no popular matching, the matching minimizing one might not be the matching minimizing the other one because there are people who abstain, and that makes a difference. So calculating the unpopularity factor or the margin is done. That's the first 2 papers. And finding a minimum unpopularity factor matching is hard, but can be approximated. About the unpopularity margin, you only know that this is hard. Approximation results are not known at the moment. I skimmed through these results because in order to go deeper, you need a lot more time on these approximation definitions. Point is, there are 2 basic approximation measures, and both of them have results and both of them have some room for improvement as well. Okay, so open questions, finally. First, very obvious from the previous slide, the minimum unpopularity margin is NP completed this to compute, but there might be good approximations. So go for approximations in that topic. For both approximability measures, there are absolutely no approximability bounds, so you can also go for that. Or from a different flavor, basically, the probability that the popular matching exists in roommates instances is not known. So there is a work for one-sided house allocation instances. This should be extended for the roommates instance as well. Nobody has done this before. And then there is one more thing that I referred to earlier, that this 2 to the 17th bound and the number of stable matchings got into stocks. So it's a really hot topic. Now, you can ask the same question about popular matchings as we asked about stable matchings. What is the number of popular matchings? There is a very loose upper bound on that from different results, but there's definitely improvement in this aspect as well. So the final open question is a bonus question. I really like popular matchings, and I think they can be motivated very well from the voting scenario, from the community-based optimality notions, but I haven't seen any real application. By real application, I don't mean that you can write in the paper, oh, it could be useful for this or that. I mean somebody who has programmed it and somebody who actually uses it in some real instance to match people to other people, for example. So if you have a scenario in mind that might use popularity as an optimality measure, please do let me know. I would be really eager to hear about something where it actually was implemented and it turned out to be useful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ágnes. I suggest everyone unmute the microphones for clapping. Right, this part is always slightly awkward because people don't always unmute at the same time. Okay, so I'm looking at the chat now. So there's, I understand. So I was one of the people who had trouble joining, so I missed some of the action in the first few minutes, of interruption. So I see one question in the chat from Bill Zwicker, which is kind of at the very end of the chat. So Ágnes, do you see it as well?
Yes, absolutely. So Bill asked this before I just started talking. Very nice question. So for example, there is the strict majority rule. When you as a popular matching have to beat everybody else, that's called strong popular matching. Everything essentially gets easy there because it's such a strict rule. Is there any other simple rule that you would like me to answer? Any specific?
I was thinking to start with a weighted majority rule, where people.
Okay, yeah, so weights in the instance are also an open question. I did not post it for a reason. I've got a draft in progress, so I don't want to talk about it. Very good question, I must admit.
There doesn't seem to be any further questions in the chat, so from now on we can proceed by people raising their hands. So I hope everyone who wants to ask a question knows how to do that. I don't see any hands at the moment. Anyone?
Bettina has her hand up.
Sorry, that was from before.
If anyone is more comfortable typing, that's an option as well. Okay, so if not, I just have to assume that it was a very clear talk. So I apologize again on behalf of the seminar organizers for the interruption. Obviously, we'll have to figure out a better way of doing that. So we'll try hard to, to avoid having something like that next time. And so in the interest of time, I think we probably should skip the breakout room idea because some of us may have to leave strictly 90 minutes after the beginning of the seminar. So I suggest everyone stays and mingles in the, general room that we have. So maybe if everyone could turn the microphone on, that may be slightly problematic, but maybe just using chat. Right, and meanwhile, we'll try to set up the next speaker. Is that okay with everyone? Dominic, do you approve?
Sorry, I wasn't listening.
Right, so I was thinking that perhaps we could skip the coffee break thing.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
In the chat mode.
Good.
Okay, and so let's say we start the next talk at, well, in 3 minutes, which would be 3 my time sharp, 4 p.m. Central, and whatever it is in your time zone. Okay with everyone?
I want to commend Ágnes for keeping her cool. next week, who is speaking and when?
Judy, next week, so we were planning to have, so I was planning to talk about it after the last talk, but we'll have a seminar at an unusual time. We'll have Harris as is hosting it from Australia. So I'm afraid the time will be chosen so as to fit, you know, the population don't usually represent well, so Asia, kind of Australia, New Zealand. So I think it may be quite late your time zone.
It's Makoto Yoku and Jiahaobe.
Okay, so Remzi, I see you are with us. Would you like to try sharing your screen?
Sorry, Edith, I didn't get it.
So Remzi, will you be using screen share? I presume you will.
Yes, I will be using screen share, yes.
So shall we tentatively see how it works? Shall we get started with
Sure.
that?
Immediately I'm doing it.
Okay, so that works for me. Okay, so I propose that given that we've lost so much time to this unfortunate interruption, so let's start with the second talk of the session, which will be by Remzi Sanver. So Remzi, you're welcome.
Edith, thank you very much. It's a true pleasure to have the opportunity to talk at the COMSOC meeting. Perhaps I will start with an apology. Typically when I present, I use the board. So it's the first time that I'm using slides and I'm not really experienced in that. And I know that my computer scientist colleagues typically have their slides like perfectly directed movies. So mine will be very primitive, but I hope it will be serving the purpose. Thank you very much. So this is a joint work with Jean-François Lallier and Matthias Núñez, who are both in the audience. And in fact, if there are chat questions which I may not be able to follow during my talk, I will be grateful, Jean-François and Matthias, if you can handle them. The paper is entitled A Solution to the Two-Person Implementation Problem. As the name implies, it reflects some research in the theory of Nash implementation and in the theory of two-person Nash implementation more precisely. And perhaps thinking that not everyone is really very much acquainted with the literature of Nash implementation, I will try to give a brief account of what Nash implementation is about. So basically, we have some social optimal reflected by some social choice rule, which is a function of individuals' preferences over the alternatives. So we have the, I would say, standard model. There is a set of alternatives A. N is the set of individuals. N is finite. A may be finite or infinite. In our paper, it will be finite, but generally speaking, of course, it may be infinite as well. L of A is the set of linear orders over A. W of A is the set of weak orders over A. So L of A to the N is the set of all profiles consisting of linear orders, and the same for weak orders. And a social choice rule, as usual, is a mapping, which maps from this one of these possible domains of preferences into non-empty subsets of A. And the non-empty subset of A is not a committee. It's simply an irresolute outcome. So there may be ties for one reason or the other. So the social choice rule can give a tie, but eventually one of those tied alternatives will be chosen. So I'm a social planner. I have some F in mind, which gives the social optimal as a function of the preferences. but I don't know the preferences of the individuals, of the voters. Well, they know each other's preferences, so the information structure is so that Nash equilibrium is a plausible concept. But as a planner, I don't know the society's preferences. Well, I can ask them, but that would be too naive because I know from the Gibbard-Satterthwaite theorem that I cannot ensure that they will be telling the truth. So can I do something wiser? Can I design some kind of a game form which, when combined with the true preferences of the voters over the alternatives, gives a game whose Nash equilibrium outcomes, well, give precisely the outcomes that I would wish to choose at that preference profile. So this formalization in these terms has been made in early 70s by Leonid Hurwicz. So the basic idea is the following. So we will be electing the president of France. Citizens have preferences. Well, we have a social choice rule in mind. Well, if we ask them the truth, they will not be telling the truth, most probably. So I design some institution, something artificial. So for example, I say to the citizens that, look, this is a set of colors, blue, white, and red, and send me a signal, a message by choosing a color, and I will be connecting your joint messages to the outcomes. So for example, if you say blue, 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 well then it will be Macron, but if you say red, 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 then it will be Benoît Hamon, for example. Well, the citizens don't care about the colors, but they care about the outcome. And they know how the color profile is connected to the outcome. So this induces a game. So technically speaking, a mechanism is a game form where this MI is the message space of individual I. Capital M is the Cartesian product. So M is a profile of messages. And H maps M into A. So given any message profile, H tells me precisely, it gives precisely one alternative, what should be the outcome. So the citizens know how their joint messages are connected to outcomes. Well, of course, given their preference profile P over the true alternatives, well, this induces a game. So somebody says red, somebody says white, somebody says blue, this gives an outcome. But well, if I know that when I change my color, there will be a new outcome, well, I play this game. And well, NE of that game is the set of Nash equilibria of this game. Of course, there is no a priori reason that there is a Nash equilibrium, but this game may have Nash equilibria. So this set NE contains the Nash equilibrium profile. So these are the profiles of colors, blue, 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 for example, of this game. And of course, when I map these Nash equilibria with H to the outcomes, well, I have a set of Nash equilibrium outcomes of the game. And of course, the ingenious idea is the following. If at any preference profile P, I don't need to know it, whatever it is, when this game is played through the mechanism, through the institution I imposed, if the Nash equilibrium outcomes equal what I would like to choose by F, well then I say that this mechanism, this game form, implements F via Nash equilibrium. Well, for those who know the literature, it's clear that the difficult part is here to eliminate bad equilibria. So it's always easy to design game forms where you have everything as equilibrium, but it's not that easy to eliminate equilibrium and to have precisely F of P as equilibrium at every P. But if I am able to do this, well, then I say that F is Nash implementable by this game form or this mechanism. This is quite demanding, and as you may realize, there is a large literature on this. So I will just go over certain major results. One early result in the end 70s, this is the seminal paper of Maskin, Eric Maskin, 1977, which has been published in 1999, indeed 22 years later. He shows that for a social choice rule to be Nash implementable, the social choice rule must satisfy some kind of a monotonicity condition, which we call today Maskin monotonicity. And Maskin monotonicity is demanding. So it's basic. It's not really very relevant to what I will be presenting today, but I will still explain. When do we say that F is Maskin monotonic? Well, in the following case, this is the condition. Suppose that some profile, some X is chosen by F, Now we go to another profile, and at this new profile, for every voter, the alternatives which are no good than X are still no good than X. So the lower contour set of X in the new profile for every voter is either the same or expands. Well, then Maskin monotonicity says that X must be chosen at this new profile as well. Well, this is demanding, as you see, because it overlooks what happens above X. So I may have some Y which is slightly above X, and then this Y may go very much up, and Maskin monotonicity says that this shouldn't harm the chances of X being elected. So it's a quite demanding condition. And we know that when the domain consists of weak orders, for the full domain, no Paretian social choice rule is Maskin monotonic. So a social choice rule which picks among Pareto optimal alternatives cannot be Maskin monotonic if you allow indifferences. Of course, I'm speaking about the full domain. For restricted domains, this may not be hold eventually, but for the full domain, this is the case. So if we have indifferences and we want Pareto optimality, we cannot have Maskin monotonicity. Hence, we cannot have Nash-implementability. On the other hand, we know that, again, this is a result due to Maskin. If there are at least 3 individuals, Maskin monotonicity combined with some weak no veto power is sufficient. And weak no veto power says that if everyone, but possibly one voter, thinks that X is the best, well, then that one voter cannot veto. So X should be within the choice set. So we know that Maskin monotonicity, then no veto power is sufficient. By the way, no veto power is not necessary. We know that Maskin monotonicity is necessary, but it is not sufficient. Well, we have full characterization results by Danilov and Moore and Rapulio. But basically, Maskin monotonicity is a core condition for Nash-implementability. And I want to also note that although we know that with 3 individuals, Maskin monotonic and no veto power rules are implementable, well, the result is not practical a lot at all. So, I mean, there is a canonical mechanism where everybody sends as message a preference profile together with an alternative and with an integer, and the message profiles are connected to the outcomes in a very complicated way. So, I mean, you wouldn't elect the president of France with that mechanism. So it shows the possibility, but it's not practical at all. And I want to note that this 3 individual result, this positive result, the sufficient result is for 3 individuals. And when we go to the special case of 2 individuals, the picture is even more negative. We know that this is a result due to Maskin and to Hurwicz and Schmeidler. When we have 2 individuals, even over the set of linear orders, so you don't have to go to the set of weak orders, even over the full set of linear order profiles, Pareto optimality and Nash implementability are incompatible unless you have dictatoriality. So this is what we call the 2-person implementation problem. We know that over the full domain of preference profiles with 2 individuals, even when you restrict yourself to linear orders, Pareto optimality and non-dictatoriality are incompatible with Nash implementability. So basically, nothing efficient and non-dictatorial is Nash implementable when you have 2 individuals. So I will have a look whether there are any questions, but I can't see it. Sorry.
It does not seem like there are any questions at the moment.
Okay, that's good. So I am continuing. Thanks. Okay, so, well, as the title suggests, what we do in our paper, we solve this 2-person implementation problem by changing slightly the definition of a mechanism. We solve the 2-person implementation problem, and we solve it in 2 senses. One is that implementability, which is used to be impossible, becomes possible with 2 people, and also the typical positive results are with impractical mechanisms, but we show that with this slight change of the definition of a mechanism, now we can implement 2-person social choice rules, certains, and with a very eminently simple mechanism. So this is what we do. And the change that we do, we go to irresolute mechanisms. So what is an irresolute mechanism? An irresolute mechanism is one where the outcome function maps the profile of messages not into a single outcome, but into some irresolute outcome of A. So it can be a subset of A, or it can be a lottery over A. In the paper, we write it as a lottery, but for the presentation of the purposes of the presentation, I'm writing IRRA. So IRRA is some set of irresolute outcomes of A. So it can be some subset. As I said, I mean, this will be some subset from which eventually one alternative will be chosen. I can also prescribe how this will be chosen. I can say, for example, there will be a uniform lottery. So I introduce an irresoluteness in the mechanism. Of course, for the game, then I will need to have preferences over the irresolute outcomes. So if my mechanism maps profiles to sets, then I need to know individuals' preferences over sets to analyze the game. Or if my mechanism outcome function H maps preferences over lotteries, well, I need to know for people's lotteries. So keeping the generality, I define this mapping K of P. So P is the preference profile over alternatives, and K of P is a set of preference profiles over the irresolute outcomes which are compatible with P. So for example, if P is my preference profile over the alternatives, well then K of P is some set of preference profiles over sets which are compatible with P, whatever it may be. So I'm keeping it very general. Or it can be some expected utility consistent preferences over lotteries. I'm keeping in its full generality because I will be using really very, very weak restrictions. But once I know the possible preferences over these irresolute outcomes, so those who wish to think as sets can think as sets, those who wish to think as lotteries can think as lotteries, well then I have again my game. I have my irresolute mechanism which induces a game. And now I introduce the concept of being deterministic in equilibrium. And deterministic in equilibrium is that, okay, my mechanism can give irresolute outcomes. H can prescribe that certain M outcomes which are irresolute, but it will never occur at equilibrium. At equilibrium message profiles, the outcome will be always deterministic. So this is what we call a mechanism to be deterministic in equilibrium. And here comes the implementation definition with deterministic in equilibrium mechanisms. So I am reading from right to left. Whatever the true preference profile of the voters for the alternatives is, whatever the true preference profile P star, which is compatible with the preference profile over the alternatives is, the equilibrium outcome induced by this deterministic in equilibrium mechanism coincides with the outcomes prescribed by F. So this is the definition of implementing with a deterministic in equilibrium mechanism. By the way, it's not the first time in the literature that we use deterministic in equilibrium mechanism, but they have been used in the theory of implementation when there are 3 or more agents. But for 2 agents, it's, I think, as far as I know, it's first time this paper which does it. And with we know that with 3 or more agents, it helps a bit. It expands the possible set of implementable social choice rules. But with 2, it really helps a lot. And here now I give an example of a deterministic equilibrium mechanism, which we call strike mechanism. Edith, how many minutes I have? Edith? Oh.
I think you have about 2 minutes and you can eat a little bit into questions.
Oh, okay, sorry. So I have to speed up. So what we do is we define a strike mechanism. So what the strike mechanism does is that it enables voters to veto any number of alternatives, which add up to m-1. So m is the number of alternatives. So suppose I have 5 alternatives. I say to the voters, well, you can veto 2 alternatives and the other can also veto 2 alternatives. So I distribute a veto power of m-1 alternative among the voters. So each player's veto VI alternatives, and the outcome is the set of non-vetoes alternatives. And this strike mechanism is deterministic in equilibrium. We show that when the extension over the irresolute outcome satisfies what we call best element bias, and this condition is simple as follows. If I have, as for example, a set ABC, A is my best element, I prefer the sure outcome A to the lottery over ABC. Under this condition, strike mechanisms are deterministic in equilibrium. And in fact, as I will show, they implement what we call Pareto-and-veto rules. So what's the Pareto-and-veto rule? Well, again, suppose we have some veto distribution among voters, which add up to m-1. For the first voter, V1 veto right. For the second voter, V2 veto rights. So the Pareto-and-veto rule, which is a social choice rule, assigns to each profile the set of alternatives which are Pareto optimal, and admit for each player at least VI alternatives in their strict lower contour set. So the chosen alternative is Pareto, and for every voter, it is better than at least VI alternatives. This rule is well defined. And well, here are our results. First, if we have the best element bias, so I prefer in an irresolute outcome the best element to everything, to the irresolute outcome, well then our strike mechanisms Nash implement the Pareto-and-veto rule. So our strike, to be more precise, our strike mechanism where the veto distribution is V, Nash implements the Pareto-and-veto rule where the veto distribution is V. But not only that, we have another result. It's not only a sufficiency, but it's also a necessity. So under some, well, I will not get into the details, but under some really mild axioms to extend preferences over alternatives over irresolute outcomes, also the Pareto-and-veto rule is the only implementable rule. So anything, in the two-person world, any Pareto optimal social choice rule, which is Nash-implementable by a deterministic and equilibrium mechanism, has to be a Pareto-and-veto rule. So indeed, the Pareto-and-veto rules characterize the class of social choice rules, which are Nash-implementable via deterministic and equilibrium mechanisms when we have two individuals only. Well, I think I will stop here. Well, there are some other results, but well, this is, I think, the main point of the paper.
Okay, thanks, Remzi. This is very nice results. I suggest everyone unmute the microphones for clapping. Okay, so there are some questions in the chat. So there was a question from Vincent that I think was answered by Remzi's co-authors, right? And then there is a question from Bill Zwicker and from Meyer, right? So Remzi, it's up to you which order to take them.
Okay, so well, I may try. So Bill says, are there multiple equilibria that lead to the same outcome? Yes, it may be. And the second question, Reshef says, but do you assume a part? No. Well, in the paper, we assume that the mechanism, if there are, if the number of non-vetoed alternatives is more than one, so if there is a set of non-vetoed alternatives, then we assume that there is a uniform lottery over this, and the individuals may have any preference over the uniform lotteries, consistent, for example, expected utility consistent preferences, with respect to some utility function which represents their preference over the alternative. But this is more general. So if you can have sets, then for example, you can have any set preference profile over sets which are consistent with, I would say, any reasonable extension axiom. Basically, the extension axioms that we use, one is the best element bias. So in a set, I prefer my best to the randomization over the set. The worst element bias says that in a set, I prefer randomization over the set to my worst. And there is something called Prex, perhaps I will not get into that, but it's some domain richness condition. It says that some extensions should be possible. When Son asks, is there a way to use this framework for the implementation of multi-winner rules? It's a good question. I don't know. Perhaps if Matthias and Jean-François has something to add. Well, I thank you, Resha, for this question.
Well, suppose that the alternatives are all the possible sets of candidates for the multi-winner rules. Okay, then if the individuals have preferences over this set such that they always prefer the an outcome with a proper number of candidates selected to an outcome with a wrong number. Okay, then because of the Pareto optimality, we will obtain the proper number of candidates. So yes, the answer is yes.
If also I may
also a question by Rida Laraki about the continuum of alternatives. Frankly speaking, I think we haven't thought of this continuum of alternatives. Here everything relies on having a finite number of alternatives.
Oh, I apologize, Rida. I really missed the question. Thanks, Matthias. And if I can also make a point, well, typically in the theory of Nash implementation, when you switch to mechanisms with irresolute outcomes, with sets, for example, what happens is that you have to extend preferences over sets. And this implicitly incorporates some kind of domain restrictions, because when you extend preferences over sets, you don't have every possible preference. Under some natural conditions, you have domain restrictions. And this is what makes implementation easier. It helps a bit when you have 3 or more voters, but as you see here, it helps a lot when you have 2 voters. And so when you go to, for example, multi-winner rules, I think also you will have these implicit domain restrictions, and I would expect good results there as well.
Bill has a good question.
There is a question by Bill. Jean-François, can you take this regarding the our sequential mechanism? Bill asked, with multiple equilibria, is there a problem in practice for players to decide on which one to play? By the way, we are running experiments as well, but...
Yes, so the answer to the question is yes, there is a problem in practice. It's not obvious, and in case of multiple equilibria, there is no clear solution to that. The set of equilibrium outcome are a part of the Pareto set, which with 2 players can be parameterized by favoring more or less one of the 2 players, but within some bounds, okay, given by these vetoes. Okay. Now the other question, slightly different, is to what extent the equilibrium, or the equilibria, because there may be several, each of these equilibria is reachable, or does it require some magic thinking of the players that they know what the other is doing? And we have a result on that saying that this kind of equilibria are stable in the usual senses of game theory, because they are a strict equilibria, and we show that they are the outcome of a straightforward adjustment process in finite time. This is my answer.
Thanks for the question. Okay, then perhaps it's good time to thank Remzi again and his co-authors for a good talk and discussion.
Can we have the coffee break that we missed?
Right, let me just say a few words in conclusion, and everyone is welcome to stay on for a coffee break. So, I apologize for the sound quality, so just very briefly. The next seminar will be hosted by Harris Aziz in Australia. So the time will be, unfortunately for some of us, 1 a.m. US, 6 a.m. UK, 7 a.m. most of Europe, but more convenient for Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. And I think we owe it to our friends in Australia and especially New Zealand, and also on the West Coast, we'll find it more plausible to join this time. Right, so I encourage everyone, as Ulla already did in the chat, to subscribe to the mailing list for the seminar. And I think most of you know where the seminar webpage is. So hope to see most of you next time. And well, next time I promise we'll work out a better solution to avoid being bombed. Thanks everyone for chatting and coffee break.
Ciao, ciao.
Okay, so I think we'll do the breakout rooms for anyone who wants to stick around. If you don't want to stick around, you can just leave the talk, leave the call. And so I'll wait like half a minute or so to see how many people are still around. Okay, so we are now at about 40. So how about we do 4 rooms? Yeah, 4 rooms sounds good.
Alors, qu'est-ce que vous faites là, Ali et Jérôme?
C'est toi qui es parti, Jean-François. Tu étais dans notre salle et tu es parti.
Ça a coupé, je ne sais pas pourquoi.
Ah,
Ah bah alors, salut Ali, ça va?
il n'y a plus grand
Ça
monde.
va, et ça? On a dit que tu étais déçu. Tu n'aimes pas le groupe, c'est parti.
Oh, there is my chef, so we should not speak French.
Okay.
Jean-François, we're saying it's like a dynamic hedonic game. I mean, you see, you're sent into a room, and if you don't like, you leave immediately.
So you are in Paris, I can see. Well, you have a nice view.
He's reporting from Paris as a journalist.
Yes.
And you, Ali, where are you?
This is my office in Vienna.
In Vienna. Okay.
So we were only allowed. We're only allowed to the offices since this week. I only been there once, and now I'm still at home.
Yeah. So we are not allowed to go to the office here. Actually, we are not allowed to go in the streets except for with written paper.
Oh, really? Wow. No, here that was never really enforced, even in the high time, even under the most strict restrictions, except in particular areas like neighborhoods in Jerusalem and other cities. There were huge outbreaks. No, but people generally try to avoid other people.
Yeah,
it's okay. I have a question about the paper.
Yes.
You're also an author, right? So, so do I understand correctly that you can take any preference extension and then just see what you get? Like you say, okay, let's see which rules have a deterministic equilibrium and what do they implement. So you use the particular extension.
Yes, but different but different extension will have the same equilibria because the equilibria are deterministic. Therefore, they only depend on the preferences over alternatives.
Ah, okay.
So this is why technically we need, of course, we need assumptions about these extensions, but they are really very weak assumptions.
So you say that every extension that has a deterministic outcome?
All extensions have deterministic outcomes.
Well, you say all extensions, but I mean, like, you can think of other extensions. I mean, what if you? So okay, so an extension is essentially is a partial preference order over sets, right?
It's an extension. An extension is a preference over sets.
It's partial, right? So you don't extend it to full preference order over sets.
We don't need because we can define it over all alternatives, but over all subsets. Okay, so formally, an extension is a preference over all subsets.
Okay, and you allow any. Okay, but you don't allow any extension over sets that is consistent with the item preference, right?
Yes, we allow almost any, in fact. So we have we just have a notion of consistency, okay? But it's a very weak, very weak assumption. But there is one important assumption with respect to preferences. It's the fact that we have strict preferences over alternatives.
Okay, yeah, that I understand. But it seems like you use the Kelly axiom, right? So you prefer if you prefer A to B, then you prefer AB to B, and you prefer A to AB.
Yes, but this is very weak. I mean,
Yeah, okay, but you do need.
Yeah, of course, there are assumptions. Okay.
Okay, and if you add other restrictions, you said that it will not change the set of equilibria.
Yes.
Okay, interesting.
And because we have an if and only if results, we have implementation results saying that, well, given a preference, these games implement the social choice rule, and we have also the results that if we allow any preference, okay, then this is the only implementable, in our sense, social choice rule, okay, and therefore we have to qualify this any preference. So there we need to consider a large enough to allow a large enough set of preference, okay, and here we have some assumptions about the set of preferences of subsets that are allowed, okay, and the assumption is it generalizes what happens with von Neumann-Morgenstern preferences, okay, with